In this video, we are going to unwrap our object. Also, we are talking about some rules and tips about how to unwrap our different objects in different situations based on our studio standards. First, you should reset your object transformation. So, I select my object here, reset X4, reset selected, and collapse it. Next step is to put UV seams to unwrap our object. For example, I select this one, go to edges, and I should decide which edge should be act like a seam. You should never pick an edge on the flat surface. For example, you shouldn't pick this one as a seam or this one. Okay, always your seam should be in the curved area. For example, this one or this one or maybe this one. Okay, so I pick here, 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 and also here, and mark it as a seam. Also, you should put UV seams inside your object, so I just go inside and select this edge, mark seam. You can pick here and mark seam here. Okay, so I pick my horizontal seam and I should cut the whole object to unwrap it correctly. Okay, so you should hide from the eyes of viewer as much as possible. So if it's our front view of the object, okay, I go to back view and select all these edges except these ones, because here I want to project like a circle. So I just remove all these edges, also inside, and mark seam. I go to UV editing. You can see I already unwrapped my object, but I unwrap it again, hit on U and unwrap. This unwrap is based on our new seams we picked for our object. Okay, one thing is so important is to check your distortion of UVs. For this, you should assign a checker map to your object. I do it with text tools. You can find it in 3ds Max also, and pick a resolution. I think 2K is enough and hit on checker map. As you can see, it automatically assigns a checker map to my object, and I can see if my UV have distortion. I can easily discover it. So I select all of them. You can see there is no distortion, but sometimes, for example, imagine this UV, and if I scale it just in here, you can see I have distortion. I should keep this checker map completely uniform, and yeah, again I hit U, unwrap, and you can see it's good. But in the curve objects like this, like here, you can see the rectangles here are smaller than here. It's acceptable in this case because it could not never like here. Okay, so you should always consider these kind of situations. It's okay in this case. When you have this kind of curve objects, it's okay. Next thing is you should straight or rectify your UVs as much as possible. For example, you can see if I want to pack this, it's not good packed. Okay, but if I straight these UV shells, I can really use my unique space of UVs. So In Blender, I use UV Toolkit straighten function. I select my UV shell and hit on straighten. You can see make it straight. It's better in the unwrap. I select this one, hit on the straight button. This one and this one also straighten, and this one straight. You can see I straight all of these, and now I can pack them better together to use the best my unique space as much as possible. But you should always consider this straightening shouldn't make your UVs so distorted. In this case, the distortion is not really much, it's acceptable. Also, the material of this object is glass, so it's not really important, but sometimes you need to take care of this. Okay, if I go here and straight this UV shell, you can see here there are a lot of distortion here, and in this case I think it's not really good to straight this part, especially when you want to add some unique details. Like for example, if you have text here, it distorts, it doesn't let you to have good text or unique details here. Okay, so you should always care about these situations, but in our object it was completely enough. So, and don't distort our UV, so I straight all the UV shells. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the material is glass, so it's not really important. We don't have any unique detail here. For example, you can have a glass but some writings in the button, for example in the normal map, so, or in the body in this curvature, so you should always care about the UV distortion. Okay, imagine you have this kind of object, it's a table and you want to put seams. For example, I pick here, go, and I should pick some seams, and always, as I mentioned earlier, you should pick an edge on the curved area. So the best one is here. I make it as a seam. This part, make it as a seam, and for this area I need to put a seam horizontally, so I just pick a seam. Yeah, behind the object is the best place, so I pick somewhere like here inside. Okay, somewhere not going to be seen as a viewer. Okay, this edge, isolate it. Let's see here, pick this one, pick this one, pick this one and this one, and put a seam here. And if I go to UV editing, select all the faces and hit on U and unwrap, you can see it unwrap it correctly. If you look at the seams, the seams are in the place, they are really hard to see by the viewer. Okay, if I go here, you can see in this place it's not straighten or rectify, so I go to my UV toolkit, select my UV shell and hit on straighten. You can see it completely become straight and rectify. And if I give it checker map, all the rectangles are equal, okay, in the width and the height. So something is so important is to, if I go here, you can see this area, it's here, so you cannot straight this part because here we have this curved bevel, but in this UV shell you can see here it's not bevel, it's kind of rectangular, so you should never rectify this kind of UV shells. If you do it, you can see it distort the UV shell. Okay, so straight the UV shells, they are like this. Okay, Next is, for example, here in this situation you have this kind of object. If I want to make it put a seam on it, you can see here this edge never going to be seen by the viewer, so I put a seam on it and I should cut it somewhere. I use this edge and mark it as a seam, and if I unwrap it, I select all the faces, hit U, unwrap. So you can see based on my seams it unwrap the object, and as you can see it need to be straight. It's a simple pipe, so it's completely matched with the situation. We can straight this, so I hit on the straight. So the thing is important, it's a really long pipe, and if I just put one edge seam, you can see I cannot use really most of my texture space even if I pack it inside, you can see. So in this situation I prefer to split my object to 3 or 4 parts. So if now I hit on U and unwrap, you can see I split it to 4 UV shells and I straight all of them, and also I want to average and pack it. You can see now I can use more my unique texture, unique space. Okay, so you should do it if you have this kind of long objects. Okay, next is to get rid of any flipped UVs in our unwrap. If I select this object, hit A, and I use text tools to discover my flipped UVs. Here I click on the flipped. You can see I have 2 UV shells that are flipped, so I should mirror them to make them correct. So I hit on the mirror in the horizontal, so I mirror them, and if I click on the flip, you can see I get rid of all flipped UVs. In 3D Studio you can add unwrap UVW modifier, go to open UV editor and click on the select and inverted polygons. As you can see I don't have any inverted polygons, so this is the way you can discover the inverted or flipped UVs in 3D Studio. Next thing is get rid of overlapping UVs. For example, if I go here and put this UV on other 2 UVs, and here if I click on the overlap, you can see it says it highlight, the Blender highlight the UV shells that are overlapping on together. So I move it here and click on the overlap, you can see there is no overlapping object. In 3D Studio you can click on the select and select overlap polygons. You can see I don't have any overlap. If I put it here and select on the overlap, you can see it highlights my the area have overlapped UVs. So I Control Z to redo my edits, yeah, and it's okay. But the thing is important, it's not always about the UV shells. You can be, for example, if I go to vertex and click here and put this vertex here, this is also overlapping. If I go down the select and I should came to face, go to select and hit overlap, you can see it highlight this place because this vertex go below or on other areas. Okay, so you should get rid of this. Always be sure about you don't have any inverted polygons or overlapped polygons. Okay, next thing I want to mention, in our studio we should use tileable textures or seamless textures as much as possible. And if you have a texture like wood, they have pattern. The pattern should be from left to right, horizontal, okay? So, based on these textures and your material, your UV shells should have correct rotation. So, as you can see, I put all my UV shells in the horizontal rotation and it works. You should always check your UVs. But the thing is important, the rotation should be completely organized. For example, let me just through crooking up these UV shells, you can see it is not good, it's not acceptable. I don't accept this kind of UV shells. You should always take care of your UVs to have kind of organized. Okay, so here select and orient it. You can see I orient my UV shells. You should do it also and make them completely horizontal or vertical. Okay. Next thing is using Rhizome UV in some rare situation. For example, you can see this object. If I want to unwrap it, I go here and pick some edges in curve. For example, here I mark seam here in the curve area. I think it's better. Mark seam, and also here mark seam. So I need an edge for cutting here. Here I already make an edge and put a seam on it to unwrap it in this way. I go to UV editing, isolate it and select all the polygons, U, and unwrap. Okay, as you can see, Blender unwrap the object, and I want to talk about this part. You can see here, and if I zoom, you can see it's this part, okay, this front part. So we should make the border edges straight completely. If I want to make it in Blender, it really take time. So I bring my object to Rhizome UV and unwrap it there. So I export this object as an OBJ. I put it here, export. Okay, you can see it's Rhizome UV interface. I go to the place I export my object and drag and drop it into the interface of Rhizome UV. And as you can see, it has a 3D viewport and 2D viewport like something we have in Blender. And I don't care about this kind of these UV shells because I told you before you can do it, but here I should use the function I can find only in Rhizome UV, and it allows you to pick some edges and make them horizontal or vertical. And in the UV function, the software dictate the parts to stay horizontal or vertical. And these are here. You can see constraint edge horizontally, and this one constraint edge vertically. You can see it's right the hotkeys Alt V and Alt T. So I hit F2 to pick edges, pick this edge, hold Shift and pick this edge and hit this one because I want to makes horizontal. You can see it become purple. Then I select this edge, hold Shift, go back here, hit this one and hit this one. You can see it become green, it means it's become vertical. So I select this edge, hold shift this edge. This time I hit Alt T, it's the hotkey to make it horizontal, and this edge, shift this edge, Alt V, it make it vertical. So now we should unwrap it. So I hit F4, so I can pick UV shells and hit U. Okay, you can see Rise-M UV do the job correctly. It makes the UV shells, unwrap the UV shell so clean and keep our edges vertical and horizontal as we pick those edges. You can see it's really nice and clean unwrap. If you go to files and hit on the export, you can select the directory, enable the OBJ file and click on the export all. It exports the OBJ and you can bring it back to your modeling toolkit. Okay, it's time to get back to our main object and unwrap it. As you can see, we already unwrapped this main part. If I go to UV editing, you can see I have it, but the rotations are different. So I pick this one, and rotate it. But as I mentioned earlier, if we have pattern, it's from left to right. So I prefer to even it's a completely solid material, but I rotate them and make them horizontal. Next thing is so important is all your UV shells should have same density. Okay, in Blender I can go here and select average island scale. You can see it scales some of the UV shells to make them completely equal. In 3D Studio Max, you can check this here, rescale. As you can see, you should turn on the checkbox and click on this. It pack your object and also average the density. Okay, for example, if I use this plugin for checking density, as you can see, hit here, select on the measure. It's about 800 textile density. This one, you can see they are the same. This one, this decimal is not really important because it happens, but in overall they have the same density. But if I scale, for example, here, you can see now it has about 2000 density, and this one have 800 density, so it's not acceptable. You should pick all of them and be sure about this rescale checked on and click on this button. You can see it average your density and pack it. The next and last function is packing your UV shells. Before you want to pack your object, you should finally partition your object, and I decide to put all the woods in one object, glass in one object, and or label in one object. So I click on the glass and select all the UVs, and it's important to know how many pixels we have an edge padding here. At this moment, the project manager is told us to put 8 pixels for edge padding, UV shell padding. So I put here 0.008, and also I don't want to rotate my UV shells, so I uncheck this rotation. And also I usually pick this one and wait for 10 seconds. Of course it's related to our object, but because it's really simple, I just wait for 10 seconds and hit on the pack. You can see it pack my UV shells, so, and make 8 pixels shell padding for me. In 3ds Max you can select all your object, put rescale checked, and also for padding you can put here, because we should have 8 pixels, I put here 0.008, select all the UVs and hit this button. You can see it rescaled all the UV shells, average them, and also pack them inside the unique space with 8 pixels shell padding. Okay, I hope in this video I cover all of the UV standards. After you watching this video, you should be able to unwrap your object correctly based on our studio standards.